Good afternoon. I'm mindful of a couple of things this afternoon. I'd just like to preface my talk by saying this. Having finished, or nearly finished, my paper on Saturday, I lost the entire copy. Macintosh's proprietary backup software, Time Machine, failed to keep a copy, ironically, for this conference. And so I began rewriting on Sunday morning and found that I had a completely different introduction. So I apologise for any rough edges. I did, however, find that Kant wanted to creep into the paper as I was writing it, and so there is a substantial amount of Kant in the introduction. And then I heard about this story. Russian man shot in quarrel over Immanuel Kant's philosophy. The Independent says, attacker now faces 10 years incarceration to contemplate the ethics of his actions. I shall be dodging bullets, I hope, for this panel. Let me ask a couple of questions to begin then. To what extent is the experience of time, or more precisely the awareness of one's relation to temporality, a sign of one's modernity? In what ways might the subject becoming aware of his or her relation to deep time give to that subjectivity a sense of loss? In confronting, however indirectly, a cosmic or geological, not to say abyssal opening of the temporal to or in oneself, how much does the subject grasp the authenticity of being as always predicated on the loss of what Immanuel Kant has suggested is an objective stability? The principal aspect of phenomenal perception, given what Adrian Johnston, following Kantian reasoning, calls its strictly temporal character, is its continual state of flux, this last phrase being Kant's own. Of course, Kant would not have known the phrase deep time, but his understanding of the subject's inner sense of temporality doubtless overturns Blaise Pascal's belief that the subject seeks to flee the present in all he or she does, whether imagining a future or remembering a past. Pascal's critique of the human desire to escape the present gets things wrong, I think, constructing in the process an unacknowledged nostalgia for the moment which can never be. On the other hand, Kant is, I believe, the first modern thinker of the absence, and with that of the growing sense in the epoch of modernity that there is no time like the present, that being, becoming aware of its relationship to temporality, is always a becoming, and with that a becoming other, endlessly deferring and differentiating from and to itself in that state of flux. Hence, one's sense of being, of becoming unbecoming, if I can phrase it like this, which is acknowledged as fundamentally reflective and phenomenological, inasmuch as, recognising the conditions for one's inner sense only in time, the subject has revealed to it that sense which, because of this awareness, is without the permanence of observation necessary for experience. The I enters into modernity, one might suggest, and hereafter can only grasp itself thus in reflective self-determination by rendering itself as a phenomenal I, time becoming the predominating pure form of intuition. As a result, the timeless and therefore forever present, forever a presence to itself, is always already the lost I. Difference arrives where in truth it had always already been, disturbing all equanimity. The Kantian subject is in effect the modern subject, then for modern subjectivity there can be no more present, no more presence as such, only a series of moments of being, a seriality of now and now and now, wherein at moments of crisis or meditative reflection, the self becomes aware of itself in relation to the temporal condition of its undoing, that singular and ineluctable revelation of being. Though it is Kant who arguably begins the deconstruction of the Cartesian cogito and so simultaneously inaugurates the thinking of the temporal phenomenal I, it is only toward the end of the 19th century that such self-reflective thought comes fully into expression in literature and in philosophy, in Hardy, in Joyce, and in Wolfe, to advertise the principal examples on which I shall draw. Kant's significance is not fully acknowledged until the 20th century, whatever the aporia within Kantian thought, which is still being contended. It is, I would suggest, that Kantian strain, for example, in Walter Benjamin, that allows Benjamin access to the idea of the angel of history, the very figure of which would be an affront to Pascal. It is Kant who makes it possible for Heidegger to assert that, and I quote, time as pure self-affection forms the essential structure of subjectivity. This reads as being a little too static, I think, at least in implication, and is arguably not that far removed from the understanding of consciousness posited by David Hume. For Hume, consciousness that mediates and projects the world is understood as, quote, a system of different perceptions or different existences which mutually produce, destroy, influence, and modify each other. For Heidegger, as for Hume, while the moment of awareness is all, there is still that motion, that flux, which is, of course, as spatial as it is temporal, which needs to be foregrounded. For the modernity of the temporal subject to be apprehended fully, there must needs be recognition of the spatial and the temporal in endless interaction with each other. And this in part serves Jacques Derrida's definition of différance in the essay of that name, wherein he argues that temporization is also temporalization, and the becoming time of space and the becoming space of time, the originary constitution of time and space from a phenomenological perspective, which will be the perspective I seek to trace in the examples from Hardy to Wolf this afternoon, as the means by which to address the advent of a particular temporal understanding of being. The Kantian legacy in the temporalization of the subject, and with that the undoing of being from within by the self-realization of becoming qua temporal flux, is undoubtedly crucial. And a decisive, not to say irreversible shift in the apprehension of time for Kant is that described by Gilles Deleuze in what he calls the first great Kantian reversal in the critique of pure reason. Time, Deleuze continues, is no longer defined by succession because succession concerns only things and movements which are in time. Thus it is that the self comes to apprehend continuity and flow through moments when inner sense becomes aware to itself of its own inescapably temporal nature. So what I want to sketch very, very quickly this afternoon is a movement from Hardy, who is trapped between succession and flow, continual flow, into ever-increasing sense of flux and return and endlessness within Joyce and Wolf. There could easily be other examples. Thomas Hardy does not quite escape succession, as I've just intimated, even if he does situate being within a greater, not to say a deep, temporal conception. Or rather say, as a sign of the historicity of the literary text, its inescapably material condition, Hardy cannot quite leave succession behind, even as he offers proto-phenomenological visions of a transcendental unity between subject and world. In at least 3 of his novels, written in less than a decade though, A Pair of Blue Eyes, The Return of the Native, and Two on a Tower, between 1873 and 1882, there are moments of crisis in perception for Hardy's subjects that are as epistemological as they are existential. Characters such as Henry Knight and Viviette Lady Constantine experience somewhat traumatic Damascene revelations having to do with both deep time and what is called now space-time. In Two on a Tower, when invited to look through a telescope by the astronomer Swithin St. Cleeve, Lady Constantine is confronted with her own insignificance in the face of space. The opening pages of The Return of the Native offer a world without, before, and lasting well beyond the finitude of the human subject. The vision of deep time is proffered in the opening chapter of that novel, not to a character, but to a reader. This is a landscape in which no humans exist and no human passes. There is little time to say much about the second and third of these novels beyond the sketch already given, but I wish to pause over A Pair of Blue Eyes. Hanging from a cliff, Knight comes face to face with a trilobite, its fossil trace the synecdoche for geological time, geology being that subject on which ironically Knight is an expert. The Hardian subject is therefore caught in singular moments, events of becoming, if you will, that make it impossible to think of a harmony between the powers of nature and the subject, even as such moments offer scant consolation of the transcendental unity promised in Husserlian phenomenology. In each of Hardy's texts, self-awareness, the Kantian inner sense of being's temporality is given through vision and perception. The double moment, given in the recognition that temporality pertains essentially to the appearing object, as Husserl argues, and with this the aporia of subjectivity, is one provisional marker of modern subjectivity apropos the temporal in Hardy's novels. Heir to Lyell and Darwin, ironically, while anticipating his fall from the cliff to his death, and I think Hardy was very mean because in the serial version he leaves Knight hanging on the cliff at the end of that month's episode, and you have to wait for another month to find out whether he's going to fall off. So this is some people suggest is the origin of the term cliffhanger in literature. But while hanging there for a month, Knight observes embedded into the cliff face this fossilised trilobite, eye to dead eye with him. And the passage goes thus. He reclined hand in hand with the world in its infancy. Not a blade, not an insect which spoke of the present was between him and the past. Knight could think of no future, nor of anything connected with his past. Separated by millions of years in their lives, Knight and this fossil seemed to have met in their death. The immense lapses of time each formation represented had known nothing of man. Knight was a geologist. His mind found time to take in by a momentary sweep the varied scenes that had had their day between this creature's epoch and his own. Time closed up like a fan before him. He saw himself at one extremity of the years, face to face with the beginning and all the intermediate centuries simultaneously. The lifetime scenes of the fossil confronting him were a present and modern condition of things. These images passed before Knight's inner eye in less than half a minute. This face-to-face with the other leads Knight into self-reflection on mortality and the place of the self in the universe perceived temporally. Millions of years unfold for Knight in a brief span of time, the inner self subsumed and the present suspended, as the geologist's theoretical knowledge is superseded by the phenomenal perception of deep time, expressed through the analogical trope of geological layers being unearthed. What is realised here additionally is, as Husserl argues that, and I quote, the image is an image in a stream of a continuity of images, for which continuity the initial fossil trace stands, to become transformed in Knight's mind through the analogy between geological layers and temporal strata over millions of years. In coming face to face with the fossil deposit, Knight's apprehension of being's flux within a greater temporal scheme illuminates the condition of flux that is the experience of time for the subject, even as he barely grasps this through a succession of seemingly cinematic moments. What I left out in the passage because it's far too long is you see cavemen and women, you see brontosaurs, you see various ferns, you see mosquitoes and other insects going through back and back and back to the moment of the trilobite itself. Suspended from the cliff, Knight is suspended also between the pre-Kantian and post-Kantian perception of the temporal condition of being. Importantly, however, time is given in the image rather than the thing itself, and thus a pre-empirical temporal position is presented to Knight's consciousness as self-awareness opens in the face of sensually accessible phenomena that project themselves in the ephemerality of this appearing, and with this a clarification of the consciousness of time. As a result, Knight is given access to a series of what Husserl calls now points, each of which occasions the crisis of his own temporal awareness and sense of being. But with every now, the present is erased once more, presence a mere chimera in the face of the temporal condition of being. The revelation of being grounded in temporality may well provoke crisis in Hardy's characters of the 1870s and 80s, if not even in his readers, who, if contemporary reviewers, Henry James, for example, are anything to go by, were just too obtuse to get it. But in other writers, this is not always the case. While the endless becoming of being, the becoming other and undoing of presence and the present to oneself, through the prioritisation of temporality in the subject, may provoke anxiety, fear, or abjection in some. In others, it is embraced as the inescapable condition of being. While for Heidegger, situatedness and the spatial are marginalised at the expense of the temporal in Sein and Zeit, for James Joyce or Stephen Dedalus at least, the becoming space of time and the becoming time of space prove inseparable for or from the subject. Indeed, there is never a question of any separability. To allude to Hardy's characters once more, while vision gives way to inner vision and terror, or at least a pessimistic inner sense of insignificance, it is only through closing his eyes that Stephen Dedalus apprehends the authentic condition of being. The singular episode concerning temporality given to Stephen's perception occurs in the Proteus episode, appropriately enough, as he walks across Sanding-Out Strand. Shut your eyes and see. Stephen closed his eyes to hear his boots crush crackling rack and shells. You're walking it through it, howsoever. I am, astride at a time. A very short space of time through very short times of space. 5, 6, the Nachayander, exactly, and that is the ineluctable modality of the audible. My 2 feet in his boots are at the end of his legs, Nebenayander. Am I walking into eternity along Sanding-Out Strand? Crush, crack, crick, crick. Won't you come to Sandy Mount, Madeline the mare? Rhythm begins, you see, I hear. A catalectic tetrameter of ions marching. No, a gallop, to line the mare. See now, there all the time without you, and ever shall be, world without end. In this remarkable passage, Joyce has Stephen expound his perception of what Heidegger terms inside, being in. Closing one's eyes, one is more completely, immediately aware of the world in which one is and of which one is a part. Being and world being coextensive. There is no visual illusion of separation between subject and world any longer. For Stephen, however, unlike Heidegger, there is always a notion of both place and time coterminously for the self. Indeed, as the passage illustrates, the self is, in its blind motion, coterminous with space, place, and the temporal, as a condition of the reflection on its being. Moving through different subject positions, second, third, and first, you, his, I, the inner self distinguishes itself from external self to announce the serial affirmation of being through various nows, whereby the cogito is accommodated to each step and the time of each step. I am, a stride at a time. Time moves through space as each step. Taking time gives access to inscribing performatively each I, now and now and now, punctuating its moments with a step which reintroduces the I once again. This complex self-reflection is figured in the onomatopoeic registration of the steps as it is in the German expressions of one after the other and one next to the other. Figures for the pace, but also for the perception of being. In turn, Stephen's feet become metrical feet as spacing and temporality become marked performatively in the motions of the passage and therefore reading itself. One might even risk the hypothesis that Joyce enables a perception of a deep literary time, inasmuch as the passage is itself intertextual, polyvocal, and thus a figure for Ulysses as a whole. This aside, Stephen's experience, his perception of the experience and his representation of those demonstrate how there is no stable present, no time to which the present or presence as indices of stability or fixed ontology can be appended. I use the term representation rather than representation. I'm drawing that knowingly from Husserl, who uses the figure representation for the way in which memory will bring back the trace of experience passed through perception and then recurring as an iterable spectral figure. Moreover, once Stephen opens his eyes, there is given to him the vision of time and the world without him all the time, as Joyce's subject reflects on the temporality that encompasses the self and of which the self is given the merest apprehension. To paraphrase Heidegger in his later lectures, I believe on Parmenides amongst other things, in Joyce time is experienced as the full word for the word of being. Time, remarks Heidegger, understood in the Greek manner, chronos, corresponds in essence to topos. Erroneously translated, Heidegger argues, as space, when more correctly the translation should be place. Time in Joyce, and I would argue in Hardy also, gives to being the significance of place, unveiling for the subject his or her historicity, and the materiality of being in relation to the temporal. There is always for the modern subject a temporality of the there, even as it is in the subject's being in the world, that temporality is given, each time, each perception having an irreducible singularity to which the literary may attest or bear witness. Which brings me to my final examples from Virginia Woolf. Much of Woolf's fiction, if not all of it, is concerned at least in part with the modern subject's reflection on moments of being, to allude to a short story title of Woolf's, and the temporal awareness of being and relation to place that can arise unexpectedly. That there is a sense of temporality expressed in Woolf's novels greater than any merely individual articulation hardly needs stressing, not least in the middle section of To the Lighthouse, Time Passes, where in what might be read as a revision or supplement in extenso to A Haunted House, time and place are inextricably, not to say intimately, involved. Throughout Woolf's novels, from first to last, characters frequently pause, suspended in their actions to reflect on times past, whether their own, as in the personal meditations on England and Englishness in The Voyage Out on the part of Rachel Vinrace, or in those moments of stilled being and awareness given various characters in Woolf's last novel, Between the Acts, where at any given time before a particular place, a field, a country lane, for example, a sense arises of a stretch of time greater than that of any individual and belonging to no one character's memory, but seeming instead to be the gift of collective memory. Time and the subject are enfolded, interestingly, in the waves, through the perception of various of the characters, not least Rhoda and Bernard. Reflecting on having to write for Miss Hudson, Rhoda finds that meaning has gone, she says, as the clock moves forward. Look, the loop of the figure is beginning to fill with time. It holds the world in it. I begin to draw a figure, and the world is looped in it, and I myself am outside the loop, which I now join, sew, and seal up and make entire. The world is entire, and I am outside of it, crying, oh, save me from being blown forever outside the loop of time. Here is the time of childhood recalled, Rhoda's memory representing to her the perception of an inexorable clock time associated with the world from which she would be shut out. On the other hand, for Bernard, there is a sense of deep time beneath his feet, quite literally. I am at liberty to sink down deep into what passes. I will let myself be carried on the general impulse. The surface of my mind slips along like a pale grey stream reflecting what passes. We insist, if it seems, on living. Then again, indifference descends. The roar of the traffic, the passage of undifferentiated faces this way and that way drugs me into dreams. And what is this moment of time, this particular day in which I found myself caught? Time has whizzed back an inch or two on its reel. Our short progress has been cancelled. I think also that our bodies are in truth naked. We are only lightly covered with buttoned cloth. And beneath these pavements are shells, bones, and silence. And I particularly appreciate the way in which this is in present tense, so that in fact there is no present. It is always moving on, it is always moving on from itself. The movement of passage is a movement through space, but it's also a temporal movement as well. Time past resurfaces with the subject's awareness as the outer sense of present. Sleepwalking reality gives way from within. The temporal consciousness of a time to which one belongs comes to the surface. The habitual self finds itself suspended from its flow, a moment of being announcing itself through a fall into a greater temporal flux. Whether negation or affirmation, the temporal in Wolf is always apprehended as greater than the subject. There is no shock save perhaps for the exclusion of the subject from meaningful time as there had been in Harvey, and unlike Joyce, whose subject had been acquiescent if not happy enough to fold himself into the temporal, even as it enfolded him, Wolf's characters strive to give subjectivity meaning apropos the temporal, even as they seek willingly to erase the present, apprehending it as nothing more than a series of phenomena, images or the halos of gig lamps perhaps, of the order of all those other temporal moments which arrive as revenant reminders of what the subject, unaware of his or her being temporal, appears to be at a loss to find, the stability of a present or self-presence. Yet in this loss and conclusion, perhaps as a result of it, modern subjectivity in Wolf bears witness to the possibility of meaning, however impossible such a possibility might well be. And in this also there might just be that sense for Wolf of the significance of the literary. Knowing that we never keep to the present, and only recalling the past or anticipating the future, as Pascal complained humans appear to do, might not be as negative a realisation as it seems. For in that realisation there is the possibility, as modernism can teach us, that we come to terms with what it truly means to be human, and so bear witness to the loss by which we are always already constituted. If there is no time like the present, then memory and hope, however weak, is what remains. They are the remains of our being, virtually. There is in this nothing to be scared of, but instead a realisation of the extent to which, though we are never on time, though we are always in some fashion touched by contretemps, this is nonetheless, in all its anatomy, who we are. Recognising this parce Pascal, we actually live, and through literature we survive. For the literary, as Wolf realises, offers the possibility of representation through what Husserl was pleased to describe in his exploration of the phenomenology of the consciousness of internal time as an exponential intensification of impression and perception, an infinity of interpenetrating modifications by means of continuous iteration, he says, in every singular event of literature. Deep time